My millionaire grandfather's funeral hadn't even ended when my parents, the people who'd ignored me my whole life, filed a lawsuit to take everything he'd left me. I remember staring at the papers, half in disbelief, half in rage. The real shock came later, inside a cold Massachusetts courtroom. My mother rolled her eyes the second I walked in, like she already knew she'd win. Then the judge looked up, froze, and said, "Wait, the charges are against you." Every whisper stopped. My parents stared confused. They had no idea who I really was, or what I'd been waiting to do for years. I grew up in a house where love was measured by silence. My parents, Diane and Scott Morrison, lived 2 states away but might as well have lived on another planet. They were the kind of people who sent postcards instead of phone calls, who showed up for Christmas only when a camera was around. When I was 3 months old, they left me with my grandparents, just for a few weeks. Those weeks stretched into decades. My first memory isn't my mother's perfume or my father's voice. It's my grandmother Helen's kitchen, the smell of melting butter, the soft thud of her wooden spoon, her laugh when I spilled chocolate chips everywhere. "The best cookies have too much of everything," she'd say. She never scolded me. To her, I was just enough. My grandfather, Judge William Parker, was carved from discipline and kindness. Every evening he'd walk in from the courthouse still in his robe, set his briefcase down, and ask, "What did my favorite lawyer in training learn today?" I'd hold up my crayon drawings, and he'd study them like legal documents. I thought that's what all families were like, until I started school. Other kids had parents at soccer games, at plays, at back-to-school nights. I had 2 empty chairs and a grandmother waving twice as loud to make up for it. When I asked why my parents didn't come, Grandma said, "They're busy with important things, sweetheart." I wanted to believe her. But even at 7, I could feel the gap widening like a crack in the wall no one wanted to fix. When my parents did visit, it was always the same. Diane would arrive in designer heels, kiss the air near my cheek, and spend the whole visit scrolling through her phone. Scott would stay outside, honking the horn for her to hurry. I learned early that pretending was their favorite tradition. My grandparents never spoke badly of them. Grandpa used to say, "Justice isn't about revenge. Ava, it's about showing up." And he showed up, for every scraped knee, every science fair, every graduation photo. When kids at school talked about inheritance or family businesses, I didn't think about money. I thought about his voice reading bedtime stories from law journals, the steady hum of the old heater in his office, the way his eyes softened when Grandma laughed. Looking back, I see it clearly now. Love was presence, not promise. Absence was a choice. So when he died and the will was read, I expected maybe his books or his watch. Instead, the lawyer handed me everything: the Brookline house, his savings, his investments, over $3 million in total, and a sealed letter addressed only to me. It said, "You earned this not by blood but by presence." I remember clutching that letter so tightly my hands shook. For the first time, I felt validated, not for the money, but for the truth. 30 days later, Thomas, my colleague and closest friend, called from his office. His voice was careful. "They filed, Ava." "Who filed?" I asked. "Your parents. They're suing, claiming undue influence." I actually laughed. They thought I'd manipulated him. They accused me of controlling an old man for his money. That night, I drove to Grandpa's study and found a folder labeled simply, "Payments." Inside were decades of records, monthly transfers to my parents, notes Grandpa had written each time they asked for more. Diane requested increases when Scott's business was failing, page after page, over $800,000. He had known this day might come. He prepared me for it. I sat in the dark with the folder spread across the desk and whispered, "You saw them clearly, didn't you, Grandpa?" The anger burned low, steady, and cold. They wanted to drag me into court. Fine. They'd finally meet the woman they'd created. Within a week, headlines started popping up in local papers. Daughter accused of manipulating retired judge. Reporters didn't know my name yet, but I could feel the whispers in the courthouse halls. Colleagues who used to nod with respect now looked away. I remember one late night at my desk. The only light was my lamp. On my screen were the scanned filings, pages of lies dressed as grief. Ava Morrison exerted undue influence on her aging grandfather to secure control of his estate. They'd painted me as a predator. For a moment, I almost believed them. That's what family does. They convince you you're the villain for finally setting a boundary. I closed the laptop, hands shaking, and reached for the box I'd brought from Grandpa's house. Inside were the payments, the bills, the messages he'd kept meticulously. Proof of 20 years of silence disguised as dependence. I spread everything across the floor. Receipts, transfer slips, letters from my mother begging for just a little extra, promises that never came true. Each page was a confession. Grandpa had kept them all organized, labeled, dated. When Thomas came by the next morning, he found me sitting on the floor surrounded by stacks of evidence. "I guess we're going to war," I said quietly. He looked around, then at me. "You really want to do this?" "I don't want to," I said. "But they do. I'm just giving them what they asked for." That week we built our case piece by piece. Witnesses, timelines, copies of every transfer, Grandpa's handwritten notes, his emails, medical records proving he was clear-minded until the end. It wasn't revenge. It was precision, the kind of justice he taught me to believe in. The nights were the hardest. A part of me, the daughter part, still wanted them to stop, to apologize, to remember I was their child. That hope had died long ago, somewhere between unanswered birthday cards and forgotten graduations. By the time the trial arrived, the fear was gone. In its place was a steadier resolve. They wanted to face me in court. They just didn't realize whose courtroom they were walking into. The morning of the hearing, Boston was covered in sleep. The streets shimmered like broken glass. My reflection in the courthouse window looked more like a stranger than a daughter. Inside, the marble floor echoed with every step, deliberate, steady. I could feel the eyes on me, the whispers. That's her. The granddaughter being sued. When I pushed open the courtroom doors, the air was thick with perfume and tension. My mother sat in the front row, hair immaculate, lips painted a soft pink meant to say innocent. She glanced up, saw me, and rolled her eyes, a long, practiced roll. She spilled juice on her designer coat. My father stared at the floor like a man hoping invisibility might save him. Judge Brennan looked up. For a second, his face was blank. Then recognition washed over him. "Wait, the charges are against you," he said aloud, before catching himself. The courtroom stilled. Palmer, their attorney, stood first. Smooth voice, theatrical gestures. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is a tragedy. A devoted daughter unfairly cut out of her father's will by a manipulative granddaughter who exploited an elderly man for his money." He gestured toward my mother. Diane dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd probably chosen to match her outfit. When Palmer finished, Thomas rose. No theatrics, just quiet authority. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Judge William Parker was of sound mind and deliberate in his decisions. It will also show that the plaintiffs, Mrs. and Mr. Morrison, received over $800,000 from him over 20 years while visiting less than once per year." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. My mother's painted calm cracked just slightly. Palmer called her to the stand first. He was surgical. "Mrs. Morrison, according to your father's calendar, you visited 4 times in your daughter's first year of life. Is that accurate?" Her lips pressed together. "I was young," she said. "I don't recall exact numbers." Thomas lifted a folder. The payments. "Your father documented each visit alongside monthly transfers to you and Mr. Morrison. Over $800,000 total. Can you explain why someone you allegedly manipulated would continue voluntary payments for 2 decades? Her voice cracked. "He wanted to help," she said. Thomas leaned in. "He did, but only financially. Emotionally, you were absent. Physically, too. When was the last time you saw your father before his death?" Silence. She glanced at my father. He looked away. 3 years before he died," Thomas supplied. "At his 84th birthday. 90 minutes, no cake, no photos. Is that correct?" She swallowed. "Yes, when it was my turn I stood. The sound of my heels against the floor echoed like a countdown. I raised my right hand, took the oath, and sat. Thomas, Miss Morrison, Tell the court about your relationship with your grandfather. I looked directly at my mother. He raised me. He taught me to tell the truth even when it hurt. Palmer jumped in. Isn't it true you benefited financially from that relationship? Yes, I said, but not in the way you mean. He gave me something you can't buy. Consistency. He showed up. Did I encourage him to cut his daughter out of the will? If inheritance was what I wanted, I wasted a lot of time having dinner with an old man instead of networking. I wasn't chasing money. I was chasing the only family I had left. The room was silent. Thomas handed the judge the sealed letter Grandpa had left me. Judge Brennan read it silently. His face softened. He looked up. This letter alone speaks volumes. He turned to my parents. The court finds that Judge Parker's will reflects his true and deliberate intentions. There is no evidence of manipulation, no sign of incompetence. The plaintiff's claim is without merit. The gavel struck. Case dismissed. Legal fees awarded to the defendant. My mother gasped like the air had been stolen from her lungs. My father slumped in his chair. As the room emptied, she approached me, voice trembling. Ava, please, can we talk? I looked at the woman who'd once dropped me off and never looked back. Talk about what, Diane? I asked. No, I said. You're the woman who gave birth to me. My grandmother was Helen Parker. Her eyes filled, but I felt nothing. Just clarity. I turned to leave, paused at the door. The courtroom lights reflected off the marble, and for the first time in years I felt the weight lift. They never knew who I really was, I whispered. Outside, cold air hit my face. I walked down the courthouse steps, heels clicking like punctuation marks in a story finally finished. Reporters waited by the steps, microphones flashing like tiny weapons. I walked straight through them. No statements, no victory speech, just the sound of my heels cutting through the noise. Back in my car, I finally exhaled. For the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Grandpa used to say, "Justice is slow, but it always arrives on time." He was right. It just took 32 years. The weeks after the trial were quiet. My parents disappeared from every headline in my life. No calls, no apologies, only silence. The language they'd always spoken best. But this time it didn't sting. 3 years later, I stood behind the same bench my grandfather once presided over, wearing his robe. Judge Ava Morrison, 39, the youngest in Massachusetts history. On my first day, I touched the wooden gavel he left me and whispered, "We made it, Grandpa." Years passed. Promotions came. So did peace. At 60, I retired. My last visit was to Mount Auburn Cemetery, where tulips bloomed around 2 headstones, William and Helen Parker. I knelt, planting a few new bulbs beside them. "You were right," I said softly. "Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up." As the wind moved through the trees, I almost heard his laugh again. Steady, proud, and free. Family isn't written in bloodlines. It's proven by presence. I learned that too late to save my parents, but just in time to save myself. If you've ever had to stand up to people who were supposed to love you, tell me your story below. And don't forget to subscribe. More truths are coming.